Hello, writers. Dialogue this week, and aren't you relieved? Dialogue is fun, right? Dialogue is snappy. Dialogue is jazzy. We all love dialogue. And we love dialogue, we know this, because we've all read pages like these. It's a little too much light there. Pages like these, right? Especially if we've read Faulkner. We've read pages like these. And we look at those pages and we go, oh my God, I have to read that whole block of prose. And we're so relieved when we come to a page that has dialogue on it, or maybe 2 pages, and we see all those nice, short, sharp paragraphs. Like this. And dialogue is often entertaining. It's fun. People get in arguments. They insult each other. It's just a lot of energy. But of course, hey, just like everything else that we've talked about this semester, there's a lot more to it than just what you might see there on the page. And I want to start us with this quote from the writer Eudora Welty. And Eudora Welty said this about dialogue. She said, "Sometimes I need to make a speech do 4 or 5 things at once, reveal what the character said, but also what he thought he said, what he hid, what others were going to think he meant, and what they misunderstood, and so forth in this single speech." What I love about that quote from Eudora Welty is that it considers, realizes, observes that when we talk to each other, especially when we're talking about meaningful things, it's often a mess. How often do you find yourself in a conversation saying to someone, wait, no, that's not what I meant. Or you say something and someone just takes it the complete wrong way. Or someone asks you a question and you find yourself not quite telling the whole truth. So that's what Eudora tells us about dialogue. It reveals what the character says. But it also shows that there might be a difference between what the character says and what the character thinks he says. Then there's what the character conceals. Then there's what other people think the character means. And then what they misunderstand. See, the trick is that dialogue only seems like real speech. It's actually not real speech. It's nothing like real speech. Hey, what you doing? Nothing much. Thinking about Chick-fil-A. Want to meet there? I don't know. It doesn't include all the ums and and weird hesitations and repetitions and all the likes and you knows. That stuff usually doesn't appear in dialogue. Good dialogue feels like real conversation, but actually isn't real conversation. Because you don't just throw dialogue into a story to take up space. You write it with purpose, just like everything else that we do. Dialogue can reveal character. We say that action reveals character, right? What you do, what your characters do, tells us who they are. Tells us something about their character. Caesar in Young Lions hits Carol. That tells us something about him. But dialogue is action too. Right now, I am speaking. I am acting. Right? I am taking action. And how I say something can also reveal character. Am I lying? That tells you I'm a liar. Do I whisper when I talk about sad things? Maybe I don't like talking about sad things, so I whisper. It often has another purpose, which is to advance the story, to keep the plot moving. There's a kind of dialogue that they talk about in theater and screenwriting called no dialogue, where characters just keep disagreeing with each other. That keeps the tension high. That keeps things moving. But sometimes dialogue advances the story because people reveal a secret, deliver some piece of information, talk about something they're afraid of, make a decision together. Okay, reveal character, advance the story, and entertain. Dialogue entertains. You'll find that in Sea Oak. You'll maybe even find that in the dialogue we review today, which is from a story called A Meeting in Middle Age. It's not super funny, but it's kind of entertaining. So reveal character, advance the story, entertain, and finally, the last thing dialogue does is, as I said earlier, imitates conversation, real conversation, without being boring the way real dialogue can be boring. Don't have your characters speak in ways that are sort of literal, exactly the way people speak. Drop the ums, drop the likes, drop the you knows. Don't use dialogue to deliver boring pieces of information. No line of dialogue should ever be boring. So if one character says to the other, "Oh, hey, it's you, Dr. So-and-so, the dentist from Timonium." That's just trying to convey information to the reader that you can put in a paraphrase. Or if someone says, "Hey, let's go to the store," they decided to go to the store, is a better way to do that. And don't just write the dialogue without giving your characters something to do. Let them talk to each other while they're playing Minecraft, or at work, behind the counter, making espresso, or maybe they're kids climbing a tree. When you do that, it's more real, and the characters act, and they have something to talk about besides what they're really talking about. Because that's what people do too, right? People will talk about something while they're doing something else. So, for example, the writer Margot Livesey offers this version of that, where she's got two characters, a man and a woman. They're cooking dinner together. He puts water on the stove, but they're having a hard time in their relationship. He puts water on the stove. She unloads the dishwasher. He gets something out of the refrigerator. She's dicing carrots. And the way Margot Livesey writes this, she says, "Of course I love you," she said. She chopped the carrot. Right? Isn't "of course I love you" not very reassuring when you're cutting a carrot? That's why you include action with dialogue. On the PowerPoint, you'll find a snippet of dialogue from a story called A Meeting in Middle Age. And it's by a writer named William Trevor. Trevor's dead now, but he wrote hundreds of short stories. Really a magnificent writer, a British writer, Irish-born, English-educated. And before you read this snippet of dialogue, I want to give you some context in the story, because it's important to understand. It's set in the late 1950s in England. And at that time, if people wanted to divorce, married people wanted to divorce, they had to have a reason. They had to have one of specific certain legal reasons, one of which was adultery. So in this story, there's a character, a woman named Mrs. Tatanka, and she wants a divorce from her second husband. He is a politician, and he's happy to give her the divorce, but he does not want to be involved in scandal. So he agrees only to have the divorce work if she is the one who commits adultery. She gets a lawyer who hires a guy who needs money, and they make an arrangement that they're going to go off for a train ride off to the country, have dinner together at a hotel, get in bed together, fall asleep. And in the morning, a maid will come in and find them, and there will be the witness to adultery, and the divorce can go ahead. Of course, if you're a guy who agrees to do this, you're probably not in great shape yourself if you need the money to do this. And that's the character, Mr. Millison. He's not in good shape. He's a bachelor. He's been living in his family's home. The family only rented that home, but they've rented it for 3 generations. And now he's losing the house. So this is a scene where Mrs. Tatanka and Mr. Millison are getting to know each other on the train ride to the hotel. And I recruited some amateur actors to play the roles here, with William Trevor sort of narrating the in-between parts. So give it a read, and then watch this. One more thing. You learn early in the story that when Mrs. Tatanka drinks, she gets chirpy.
I've had a hard life.
Mrs. Tatanka confided.
Tonight I need your sympathy, Mr. Millison. Tell me I have your sympathy.
Her face and neck had reddened. Chirpiness was breaking through. In the house, in a cupboard beneath the stairs, he had kept his gardening boots, big heavy army boots, once his father's. He had worn them at weekends, poking about in the garden. The lease came to an end 2 years ago. There I was, with all that stuff, all my gardening tools and the furniture and the bric-a-brac of 3 generations to dispose of. I can tell you, it wasn't easy to know what to throw away.
Mr. Millison, I don't like that waiter.
Mr. Millison cut his steak with care, a 3-cornered piece, neat and succulent. He loaded mushrooms and mustard on it, added a sliver of potato, and carried the lot to his mouth. He masticated and drank some wine. Do you know the waiter? Mrs. Tatanka laughed unpleasantly, like ice cracking.
Why should I know the waiter? I do not generally know waiters. Do you know the waiter?
I ask because you claim to dislike him.
May I not dislike him without intimate knowledge of the man?
You may do as you please. It struck me as a premature decision, is all.
What decision? What is premature? What are you talking about? Are you drunk?
The decision to dislike the waiter I thought to be premature. I do not know about being drunk. Probably I am, a little. One has to keep one's spirits up.
Have you ever thought of wearing an eye patch, Mr. Millison? I think it would suit you. You need distinction. Have you led an empty life? You give the impression of an empty life.
My life has been as many other lives, empty of some things, full of others. I am in possession of my sight, though. My eyes are real, neither is a pretense. I see no call for an eye patch.
It strikes me you see no call for anything. You have never lived, Mr. Millicent.
I do not understand that.
Order us more wine.
There is so much that is great about that dialogue. Maybe not the performance, but the dialogue itself is fantastic. Ask yourself, what are some things that you noticed? Did the dialogue entertain? Well, there's Mrs. Tatanka saying, have you ever thought you should wear an eye patch? You ever thought of wearing an eye patch? That's just not the kind of thing that comes up in your basic normal conversation, right? And then this back and forth about the waiter, and she gets all snotty. How would I know a waiter? I'm not the type who generally knows waiters. So her character is revealed. And so is his. Did you notice? She asked him a question. She didn't ask a question. She said, I need your sympathy. I have had a hard life. I need your sympathy. And how does he respond? He chews and drinks and then starts talking about his own troubles. It's almost as if they're not in the same room. And we're learning all that just from the dialogue. That he's got troubles that are so distracting, he's not paying attention to her. She says, I've had a hard life, but she's going into her second divorce and she wants that divorce and she's married to a famous politician and maybe she's had a hard life, but he's not in great shapes either, Mr. Millicent. He's losing the family house and that seems to me a little bit worse than her trouble. So she's clueless. He's clueless and distracted. She reveals her snobbery. She starts insulting him. And then she says, are you drunk? And, I have a pretty strong sense of who's actually drunker in this scene. And it's not Mr. Millicent. And that just sets up what comes later. She accuses him of being drunk when she's the one who's probably been drinking too much. And then she says, have you led an empty life? You give the impression of an empty life. And who is she really talking about? So yeah, dialogue. It's not just a way to break up space. It's not just a thing to do when you want to change up the rhythm. We'll talk about it more on Thursday, including some of the nuts and bolts of how to do it. Bring questions. That'll really make it an actual dialogue. See you then.